All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we are diving into the Bowen family systems theory, aka Bowenian, aka multi-generational, but it is by Murray Bowen, so it's in the name. That's why it's called the Bowen family systems theory. Specifically, we're looking at extended family systems perspective. And so this is one of those theories that feels simple at first, and then the longer you sit with it, the more you realize it explains basically everything. Bowen's work gives us language for patterns you already intuitively notice. So, like why anxiety seems to travel through families, why the same conflicts repeat across generations, and why cutting someone off doesn't actually bring you peace. It just relocates the tension. So, as you listen today, I want you to think in two directions at once. So, first, think clinically, of course, and how this theory shows up in families that you'll work with and that you're currently working with. And then second, I want you to notice, kind of quietly how this shows up in your own family system. I think that's a big part of this class is kind of self-awareness, right? So you don't need to share that part with anyone else, but Bowen would say that it's essential if you want to practice this model ethically and effectively to look at your own family, right? So who was Murray Bowen? This handsome fella right here, right? So he was a psychiatrist who believed that individual mental health cannot be separated from the emotional system of the family. So rather than focus on pathology inside one person, Bowen zoomed out and asked, what is the emotional process happening between people, especially across generations, right? So a lot of the theories we've looked at already kind of zoom out and look at the family system, but he looked at it across generations even. So Bowen was particularly interested in anxiety. Hear that. Anxiety was what he was interested in, not as a diagnosis, but as an emotional reactivity that spreads through relationships. And families develop predictable ways of managing anxiety, according to Bowen, um, through closeness, distance, conflict, or by pulling in the third person, triangulation, which we've already touched on a little bit. So that's why Bowenian therapy focuses on patterns over time rather than systems in the moment. So his stretches out over time and even looks at, our deceased family members. All right. Okay, so we're going to look at the key concepts. I want to, take a moment just to walk through. We've got 8 of them, and it forms the foundation of this model. So think of these as the main lenses that we'll use to understand families from a multi-generational perspective. So let's just go point by point. So first, we've got the differentiation of self. This is really the heart of Bowen's theory. Differentiation refers to the ability to stay emotionally connected with others while also maintaining your own thoughts, values, and identity. So, in other words, you can be close to people without losing yourself, and people are less differentiated. Um, the people that are less differentiated tend to become emotionally reactive or fused with others. And then, while those who are more differentiated can think clearly without relationships, even when they're stressful. So, without, getting lost in that stress. So, that's differentiation. Second, we have the nuclear family emotional system. And so remember, nuclear is kind of your created in the immediate, what your system you live in, your roommates, maybe it's your spouse and your children. But you can kind of think outside the box of what that looks like for you. So this concept looks at how anxiety and emotional tension show up in the immediate family. And Bowen believed that families develop predictable patterns to manage stress, such as marital conflict, distance between partners, dysfunction in one spouse, think addiction, or focusing on a child as the problem. That's probably going to be the most common, I think. And these patterns aren't random. They're the way families try to stabilize anxiety. And then we've got emotional triangles. And so triangles form when tension between two people becomes really uncomfortable, and then they recruit a third person or an issue gets pulled in to relieve that stress. And so, for example, parents who are in conflict, they might shift their focus onto the child's behavior. And this temporarily reduces tension between the parents, right? Because they're focused on the kid, but it prevents the real issue from being addressed. And so once you start noticing triangles, you'll see them everywhere. And triangles happen not just in families, they happen in friend groups. They happen in this program. I saw it a lot when I ran COPE. Um, if, a supervisee, one of the interns, sought supervision and they didn't like the answer they got, they might come to me or they might go to another faculty member. They might try to pull a third person in, um, because the tension between them and their supervisor, maybe they disagreed on a clinical issue or whatever. And it's not that serious. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just sort of a natural tendency sometimes. And it also depends on kind of the family that you were raised into and what your dynamics were. So triangles can really happen anywhere. And that's just an example of like a non-family triangle thing happens. So once you start seeing them, you'll see them. All right, next we're looking at the family projection process. And so this describes how parents transmit their emotional anxiety to their children. And often one child becomes the focus of the parent's fears, worries, or expectations. And then over time, that child may develop symptoms or emotional struggles that reflect the anxiety in that system. So this isn't about blaming the parents, it's about recognizing unconscious patterns. And so it's the parents really just projecting onto their children, projecting their anxiety in particular. All right, another concept is sibling position. Bowen believed that birth order and sibling roles influence personality and relationship patterns. And he thought that gender played a role into this, like if you were the firstborn daughter or the firstborn son or the middle daughter, middle son, middle or baby daughter, baby son, like all of that played a role in. And then when you get married, kind of how those pairs match up. I don't have them memorized, but he really had some theories on that. And so, he thought that that played into your personality and relationship patterns. And I think this is an Adler concept too. You might remember from your theories class. So, for example, firstborns may take on responsibility or leadership roles, while younger siblings might be more flexible and rebellious. And these patterns can shape how people function in adult relationship and marriage. So I'm an only child, only daughter, and my husband is a youngest out of two. He has an older sister, and so I don't know what that says about us, but that's kind of how that's just an interesting pairing. So just kind of think about your pairing. If you've got a significant other, what is your sibling position? What is theirs? How do you think that plays out? Um, and it's just interesting to talk about. And we'll talk more about it in class. All of this actually. All right, next, moving on to emotional cutoffs. This happens when people manage anxiety by creating distance. So they may move away, limit contact, or avoid emotional conversations with family members. And while cutoff can bring temporarily relief, Bowen believed it often increased anxiety in the long run because unresolved emotional issues remain. And so I'd be interested to see what your thoughts are on this. I think sometimes cutoffs are necessary, especially when there's abuse. Um, I don't think cutoffs are 100% always bad, but according to Bowen, cutoffs leave things unresolved. So next is the multi-generational, that's a mouthful, transmission process. So this concept explains how patterns of functioning, anxiety, and differentiation are passed down over generations. So you've got your parents projecting onto the children, and then it's how this travels to the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, the great-great-great-grandchildren, and you're inheriting dynamics from, people you never even met before in your lineage. And so small differences in coping and emotional regulation can grow larger over time. And that's why Bowenian therapy often includes exploring family history and building genograms. And so that's why you just kind of keep it simple. We just look at you, your children, if you have any, your parents, and then your grandparents. Um, and that is to examine the multi-generational transmission process. And then finally, the last one we have here is societal regression. So Bowen extended his theory beyond families and believed that entire societies can function like emotional systems. And so when anxiety rises in society, we see increased polarization, reactivity, and a search for simple solutions or scapegoats. And so, in other words, the same emotional processes that we see in families can also show up in communities and cultures. And so this is why this work can be really important because you're helping families, you're helping your community, and it could be a ripple effect. So as we move forward, we'll unpack each of these concepts in more depth. But for now, I just wanted you to start you out thinking about these patterns, how these patterns show up in your own families, your relationships, and then eventually your work with clients. even individual clients, and even kids in the schools, right? Especially kids in the schools because they're so a part of that system on a day-to-day basis and it's shaping their little brains. All right, so differentiation of self and emotional fusion. Let's spend a little time here with this concept because the idea of differentiation of self is really the primary goal of Bowenian therapy. So if you take nothing else from this theory, take this. Differentiation of self is where it's at. So when Bowen talked about differentiation, he wasn't talking about independence or emotional distance necessarily. He was talking about the ability to stay connected to the people that you love while also maintaining a clear sense of who you are. So you can be close but not consumed, and you can care deeply but not lose yourself. And so, one way to think about this is the ability to distinguish your own thoughts and feelings from those of others, especially your family. So, in highly fused families, emotions spread quickly, right? Anxiety, anger, whatever. And if one person is anxious, everyone becomes anxious. And if one person's upset, the other feels responsible for fixing it. And so over time, people begin to lose clarity about what they themselves actually think and feel. And so a lot of you, in your early 20s, you're in this really tender age where you are becoming more differentiated and making decisions in your life without being so worried or dependent on what your parents think or your siblings or whoever. And again, this is all cultural, right? This is American, and this is kind of the hyper independence kind of that we have running through our culture. So you just got to keep that lens in mind too, right? But differentiation of self is sort of the goal of Bowenian family theory. And differentiation allows you to pause and ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? What do I believe? What matters to me, even when the people around you disagree or feel uncomfortable? And so this leads to the third point on the slide, which is that differentiation involves not being overly controlled by how others react to your choices. This doesn't mean that you don't care about others, right? It means that your decisions are not driven purely by fear or rejection, conflict, or disappointment. And so, for example, a differentiated person might say, I understand that this is hard for you, and I still need to make this decision, even though it's hard for you to accept. And they can tolerate the discomfort in the relationship without ever attacking, withdrawing, or immediately trying to fix the tension. So, on the other hand, emotional fusion often looks like people constantly monitoring others' emotions, trying to keep the peace and avoiding difficult conversations. It can look like compliance, people pleasing, or intense emotional reactivity. So, as future therapists, and honestly as humans, the goal is not perfection. The goal is gradual growth and differentiation. So, this happens through self awareness, observing patterns, and learning to stay calm and thoughtful even when relationships feel emotionally intense. So as we continue, I want you to start noticing, where do you feel pulled into fusion? Where are you already showing signs of differentiation? All right, so don't confuse cut off with differentiation. Um, it's not about hyper independence. It's about being able to stay connected, but be your own person. So don't confuse cut off with differentiation. Um, so there's that. Triangles. Triangles form when two people under stress pull a third person or an issue to stabilize anxiety. Triangles temporarily reduce tension, but they prevent real resolution. A classic example involves parents shifting focus to a child's behavior instead of addressing marital conflict, and then the child becomes the identified problem, stabilizing the system. Right? So, triangles. Now, there's the Cartman drama triangle. You may have heard this in other classes. The Cartman drama triangle involves the victim, the persecutor, and the rescuer roles. And it becomes problematic when roles become static, right? Sometimes we slip into this. We're not perfect. We get into these funky dynamics, but we're able to get out of them if we're healthy. But that's when the problems come, when you get stuck and so, like maybe the rescuer is constantly seeking someone to fix, right? I can fix him, I can fix her, whatever. Or victims repeatedly seeking perpetrators because that's what feels familiar and comfortable. So just because it feels familiar doesn't mean that it's what we need, but that's usually kind of what we gravitate to, what we feel familiar with. And so we'll watch a video clip of the Pearsons in the family therapy. Like I told you, I think we talked about this earlier, and then we'll see the dynamics in action. And so we'll watch it together in class, but it's when it's in maybe a few seasons ahead of where we actually are all together. And it's Kevin goes into rehab. And anyway, we'll watch the clip together, but it really highlights some of these Cartman drama triangle dynamics. But you can probably already guess what that looks like with them. All right, now we're looking at techniques. Okay, so now that we've talked about the major concepts of Bowenian therapy, let's shift into how this theory actually shows up in practice. And so, one thing students often notice in Bowenian therapy is that it can feel less dramatic and more thoughtful than some other approaches. Um, it's certainly less dramatic than satir. But this goal is not to create a big emotional breakthrough in session, but it's rather to help clients slowly change how they function in their relationships. So, one of the most important tools in this model is the genogram. And we're going to be doing one. Everyone's going to do their own genogram, and I'll talk more about that here in a minute. But this is more than just a family tree. It's a genogram maps your emotional relationships and patterns, your alliances, your cutoffs, and any repeated themes across generations. And it helps clients to see their struggles that they didn't start with them necessarily. And when people begin to recognize these patterns, it often reduces shame and increases curiosity. So instead of asking, what's wrong with me? They start asking, what is happening in my family system? Where did this come from? How did we get here? And it just kind of takes the shame, kind of takes the air out of all the shame around it. So another technique is called in Bowen is called Journeys Home, and I remember actually practicing this when I was learning about it. This involves encouraging clients to interact with their family of origin in more thoughtful and intentional ways. And so this may even mean physically visiting your childhood family, your family of origin, without your spouse or your partner or a friend, without anybody to kind of triangulate in or have backup. You kind of go and visit them in an intentional way. And the goal is not confrontation or emotional release, any kind of catharsis. Instead, it's about observing, staying calm, and practicing differentiation in real life situations. So clients learn to notice their emotional reactions and respond differently. And this really can be a powerful thing, let me tell you. All right, next, Bowenian therapists also use process questions. So these questions help clients slow down and think about the patterns instead of only focusing on the content. And so I noticed when y'all were practicing in class that we're getting caught up in a lot of content, which is so easy to do. I do it too, especially when I work with couples. But, instead of asking what happened during the argument, this is the issue, she said this and she said that, and this is what they're mad about, right? We don't ask what happened during the argument. What y'all arguing about? We might ask what usually happens when the two of you disagree, or who gets pulled in when tension rises. And these types of questions help clients to see systemic patterns over time. And if you can see them, then you can start to change them. All right. So another focus is building person-to-person relationships. This is kind of addresses some of that triangulation stuff. So rather than communicating through others or triangulating, Bowenian work encourages direct, thoughtful communication. This helps reduce anxiety and strengthens differentiation. And that's kind of hard to do, especially when there's conflict, when it feels risky, when it feels like, well, I've got this issue with this person, and if I go to them, I don't know if they'll even care, or they might get defensive. And all those things are true. And at the same time, if you can practice differentiation, okay, if they're mad, they're mad. They're just gonna have to be mad. Um, and of course, you're not delivering it in an aggressive, ugly way. You're speaking your truth to them. You're communicating to them in a assertive way, and not passive aggressive, not aggressive, but assertive. And so that is person to person relationships. And then we also help clients practice observing their family while controlling their own emotional reactions. This is kind of like Journeys Home, right? So this is challenging. Most of us react automatically in family interactions. Same. Bowenian therapy teaches clients to step back and notice their anxiety and respond more intentionally rather than emotionally. And then this leads to the concept of detriangulation or stepping out of the triangles. So instead of getting pulled into conflicts between other people, clients learn to maintain connection without taking sides or absorbing emotional tension. And this is a key part of increasing differentiation. And I'm not saying all this is perfect and, I agree with all this, but I think there's a lot we can take from this. And then finally, there's the use of I statements. So, like when you do this behavior, I feel this emotion, and instead I would like, XYZ. So the goal is not to blame, but, clarity and ownership. And the I statements help people express themselves while staying emotionally grounded and reducing defensiveness. Because when you start with you, then you put that person on the defense. So when you just say, hey, this is making me feel whatever, right? So then you're owning your feelings, but you're letting them know what you're reacting to. And those are Bowenian techniques. All right, so genograms. Your genogram assignment is coming up. So before we move on, I want to pause for a moment, talk about, it's really central to your development, not just as therapists, but as people. And in this, that is the importance of doing your own personal genogram. That's why we do it. That's why we do it. I did it as a grad student. We did it when I was a doc student. Those master students did it in Idaho. And then I've just kind of carried that tradition of the family therapy classes that everybody does a genogram. And it's really, I think it's really good. Students seem to get a lot out of it each year. So one of the unique things about Bowenian theory is that it doesn't just ask us to understand families intellectually. It also asks us to take a look at our own emotional systems. And so, in fact, Bowen believed that you cannot effectively work with families if you're not willing to examine your own patterns first. So, this isn't about perfection, it's about awareness. And as grad students, you're learning theories, techniques, and interventions, but one of the most powerful tools you will ever have is your ability to stay calm, grounded, and differentiated in emotionally intense sessions. And so that ability does not come from reading a textbook. It comes from knowing your own triggers, knowing your own emotional reactivity, and the patterns that you carry from your family of origin. And so when you start feeling triggered, and I'm sure that you already have clients in your internship that kind of irk you, get under your skin, and trigger you a little bit, and you probably already have a good idea of where that comes from, right? So this is just to kind of take a systematic look at that. And when you complete your personal genogram, you may start to notice patterns that you've never fully thought about before. You might see themes of anxiety, conflict, closeness, distance, trauma, resilience, roles that repeat across generations. You may begin to understand why certain situations feel especially activating for you. And that awareness doesn't is it's not meant to create shame or blame, never, ever. It is meant to create compassion for yourself and for your future clients and for your current clients, of course. So, um, all right. This process also helps you build empathy, of course. When you sit with your own family history, you gain a deeper appreciation of how complex and layered every family is. And it reminds us that people are shaped by generations of experiences, not just present moments. And that perspective is essential when working with clients. So, another reason this assignment is so important is because your level of differentiation directly impacts your effectiveness as a therapist. So if you're highly reactive in your own family, you'll be much more, it'll be much harder to stay grounded when working with emotionally intense clients. But when you begin to observe your own patterns, you gain more flexibility, you become less likely to get pulled into triangles, less likely to take sides, and more able to think clearly under stress. You're just going to be more an effective therapist the more self-aware you are. And I also want to acknowledge that this can feel vulnerable for sure. You are not required to share anything you're uncomfortable sharing. The goal is not exposure, the goal is reflection. So you're always in control of how much you disclose. And so, as we move into this assignment, I want you to approach it with curiosity rather than judgment. And this is not about labeling your family as dysfunctional. Every family has patterns, good and bad, for better, for worse. The question is simply, what are they and how do they shape you? That's all I want you to get from it. And so, this is the requirements. These are in your syllabus. You must include all members from your grandparents down. So your kids, if you have any, your parents, and your grandparents. I think I said that earlier. Then you may need to collect information from other family members. So figure out kind of who you feel most comfortable talking to. Is it an aunt? Is it your mom? Is it your dad? Is it your siblings? Your siblings may not know, as much. If your grandparents are still living, you might think about reaching out to them if you think that would be okay. And then you must identify yourself in a special way so that I can easily find you. So a big star or a big highlight or a big bold or something. I need to be able to go right to you because it's so hard to grade a genogram when I can't even find where it starts. I can't even find you. All right, so You must include first names and identifying years. So include the dates of like their age. The age helps, the current age kind of helps. But if you don't put age, put birth year, because then that you'll be able to kind of look back at it. But I like to know developmentally where are people, where's everybody at developmentally? Ages of any deaths, if that's part of your genogram, ages of marriage and any separation or divorces, not ages, but dates, dates of death, dates of marriage, dates of separation, divorce, any kind of abortions or miscarriages, things like that, significant losses. The reason the dates are important is because you want to see, okay, when did this happen to this person? What were they going through developmentally? Or did anything coincide? Did they lose a parent at the same time they were going through a divorce? Oh my gosh, that must have been so hard, right? So this is why the dates are important. This is why I ask you to include those. And this is the main thing that people forget to include in their genogram. Please don't forget to put your dates in there. All right, number five, must include the tracking of family dynamics. Don't just have a family tree and be like, oh, we all get along perfectly. If y'all all get along perfectly, put it in there. Put those healthy, wonderful, positive dynamics. I want to see it. So special closeness, any distance, hostility, cutoffs, etc. Put that stuff in there as you see, at your comfort level. You also, it just, my main thing is it can't just be a family tree with nothing. Y'all are related, so show the relations, right? All right, number six, you must include any kind of alcohol or drug issues, physical or mental health issues, again, at your comfort level. But the goal here is to see the patterns. This is especially useful in addiction. If people can see that this is a disease, a lot of times that's passed down and inherited, where did this come from? How did it impact my family? What must have my mom gone through when her dad was drinking? Just examples, right? What must my dad have gone through when his you know, mom was struggling with depression, whatever. So we're looking at these, where else does depression show up, right? Whatever that is for you. Um, those patterns is what we're looking for. Also, number seven, consider tracking things in your family that are especially important to your family, like education, religion, military, race and ethnicity, those things, those are the most common ones that I see pop up, but it might look different from you. Um, you might be first gen, and that's really important to note on your genogram too, a first gen student. And so note those things if you have anything like that. And it must have a key. So I don't really care what symbols you use. There's lots of different examples out there. I need to be able to look at the key. And then when you draw that squiggly pink line from you to your cousin or whoever you're drawing the squiggly line to, your sister, your mom, your dad, I need to know what that pink squiggly line means, right? Does that mean there's a special closeness? Is there tension there? What does that mean? So I don't care, like I said, I don't care what the symbols and lines and all that is. It just needs to match up with your key, and I need to be able to find it in your genogram. Okay. And I'll bring examples to class. But here's what a key would look like. And so you would have these different symbols. I will say, if you could just stay consistent with the genders, the circle is female and the male is square. That just helps me to easily look at it. There's also transgender symbols here too. That just kind of helps me follow along to kind of where everybody is and how everybody's related. But like the lines here, like you can kind of see that there's like squiggly lines and different colored lines and different dashes and dots and different boldness. That's up to you, you know, and because I don't have these memorized, but I do have those circle squares and all that memorized, and so that would be helpful if you could keep that consistent. But other than that, I don't care what symbols and lines you use. Here's some more examples, basic genogram symbols. Right here, you can see that they put ages in there. They drew the X. That's for if that person is deceased. That kind of helps me. That's a good quick eye catcher there too. But again, as long as it matches the key, I can't say anything. All right, so, and then here's some more family relationship symbols that you can see a little bit bigger, more clearly. And here's some more relationship symbols if you're just looking for ideas or inspiration. And I pulled a lot of these images from Google, and they're in that genogram book. I might unless somebody borrowed it and didn't give it back, I might have one you can come by my office and look at and make copies if you want to. But it's in the syllabus if you're interested in getting the book or maybe seeing if the library has it or renting it or whatever. But a lot of these symbols you can just Google, find them online. So, like I said, as long as you got your symbols in your genogram and it matches the key, we're good to go. All right, so I don't want you to just do a genogram and just not really think critically about it, of course. These are some questions that you might consider. I think these are the same, or along the same lines as the questions in your reflection prompts. You do have to do a reflection to go along with the genogram. And you bring the genogram to class, and then the same day that you bring your genogram to class, that's when your reflection is due. So just if you want to add to your reflection after class, after, you kind of chat with your classmates and me about it, you feel free to do that. It just needs to be turned in by midnight that night. So when you're making your genogram, these are the questions. Looking at your genogram, how would you describe your family? Given what you know about your family, what did the genogram overlook or not capture about your family? What patterns do you notice? Did they surprise you? Why or why not? How might you use the genogram as you move forward in your own personal, social, and academic development? How might you use the genogram to assess and treat clients? And how did this activity add to your learning about your family? And what new questions came from this activity? So these are the kind of questions I'll be asking you when I'm making my rounds on the genogram fair day. And so just kind of be prepared to discuss these. It's going to be really informal, but I just want to see that you were intentional and put some thought into it and gain some self-awareness from it. All right, so tying in This Is Us, we'll go through this in class. I always like to print out colored pictures of the cast and then kind of tape them up, and then, we kind of together we make a genogram for the Pearsons. So be thinking about the Pearsons genogram, and we'll play with this in class. It's just for fun, but this is kind of how it's set up. All right, so reminders and to do next week. Well, spring break is coming up. So after I see you in class next week, will be spring break, and your genogram assignment is due when we return. So bring a poster to class the Tuesday after spring break and submit your reflection that Tuesday by 11:59. Um, we kind of got a hard deadline because the event is that Tuesday on the poster. If you need to turn your reflection in late, just let me know. I can work with you. But please get that poster done by the Tuesday after spring break, the following Tuesday. I think that is March. I don't know. We'll go over the date in class just to get real clear on when the due date is. But it's just a lot more fun when everybody brings theirs and participates. And like I said, you don't have to stand in front of the class and do it. We're gonna go around and do it informally. So those are your reminders and to-dos. Make sure you read chapter 5 in the book, and then you won't have anything to read over spring break. You just got to do your genogram. So I think that is all I have. I appreciate you listening. This is a fun chapter. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I look forward to talking with you in class about it.